This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. Adam Schiff, Democrat, represents Area 51, chairman of the House Intel Committee, was on with Clinton Foundation donor Zero over the weekend talking about, sticking to the fact-free conspiracy theories he's been banding about for the last 2 years. Doesn't really, I don't even know why Mueller filed a report. It doesn't matter to what
no one's paying attention to it.
Well, it doesn't matter in terms of what Adam Schiff was going to say about it, about what the president has or has not done. And no, sir, if they don't get compliance with subpoenas, their new tack is
money.
$25,000 a day personally. Good luck with that challenge. But I mean, it's actually really sinister because it's a way to try to obviously intimidate people into compliance, number one. Number two, to potentially bankrupt people or put them through significant financial duress so Schiff can get his way. It's very thuggish, as Schiff is.
Well, we're going to have to enforce so much of this in court, and we're seeing signs already, and I think this is positive, that the courts understand the urgency here. In the first case to get to the court involving the accountants, the House Oversight Committee, the judge has said, essentially, we're going to expedite the schedule. I'm going to give you a quick judgment on it. And look, we are going to have to consider other remedies like inherent contempt, where if the courts take too long, we use our own judicial process within the Congress. And look, I think if you find someone $25,000 a day to their person, until they comply, it gets their attention.
If you can collect.
Well, if you can collect, but it affects, whether they're going to be facing ultimately hundreds of thousands of dollars of damages. I don't know how many are going to want to take that risk for Donald Trump.
Is that even legal, what he's talking about?
It would not. I don't think it would hold up to a constitutional challenge, no. Writing about the Mueller report and the aspect of the look back at 2016 that is happening, Bill Barr, Christopher Wray, Kevin Brock writing in The Hill. This is really, this is pretty good rhetorical flourishes for a former assistant director of Intel for the FBI. You don't usually get this guy. Maybe just like a creative writer in his previous life. Kevin Brock writes, Comey has realized, probably too late, that he has to try to counter more directly the narrative being set by the unsparing Attorney General, whose words in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee landed in the Trump opposition world like holy water on Linda Blair. Shrieking heads haven't stopped spinning since. And then he addresses Comey's op-ed in the New York Times, where he's talking about where Bill Barr is having his soul eaten by Trump one morsel at a time. Writes Brock, Comey trotted out his now familiar St. James shtick, freely pronouncing on the morality of others. He sees himself as a kind of pontiff of the Potomac working his beads, but comes across more like an unraveling Captain Queeg working his ball bearings. I'll tell you, that's pretty good right there. That is pretty good stuff, and you don't have to be a Humphrey Bogart fan to appreciate it. For more on this, and also the story we talked about a little bit earlier, that's terrorist camp that was identified in Macon County, Alabama. We're pleased to be joined by Kevin Brock, former assistant director of Intel for the FBI, was a special agent for 24 years and principal deputy director of the National Counterterrorism Center. He's a founder and principal of New Street Global Solutions, which consults with private companies and public safety agencies on strategic mission technologies. Kevin, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And if you saw my grades in English in college, you wouldn't call me a creative writer.
Well, I'll tell you, this is pretty good stuff for a G-man. This piece in The Hill is pretty colorful. Give us your synopsis of why you think Comey is in trouble and he knows it.
I think it's betrayed by his own words and actions. I think it was reinforced last week in his CNN town hall, where he didn't really want to discuss specifics about why the case against the Trump campaign, the counterintelligence case, was initiated. When pressed mildly, he just deflected, said he couldn't recall, or he deferred comment to to the FBI, which he knows won't comment. But he pivoted back to just pretty much an attack on Trump, a steady attack to call him a chronic liar, an amoral person, criminal, and he wanted to focus on that. I think that's part and parcel of a strategy now that we're seeing unfold since the Mueller report has undercut any idea that the original investigation was started based on, a satisfactory predication. The argument seems to be now coming out of Comey something along the lines of, well, he was a horrible person and we had to stop him, and so that was the rationale. Well, that's not sufficient basis for initiating an FBI investigation on anybody just because they're horrible or you don't like them.
So when the FBI initiates an investigation on someone, do they essentially spy on them? Because that was a big, point of contention, is whether or not the FBI spied, wiretapped the Trump Tower.
It's a fascinating side argument, I call it, whether it's spying or an investigation. I know Mr. Comey has addressed this. The Attorney General used the term in front of Congress. I don't get all the uproar. It's a word. Comey's right. The FBI conducts investigations. They deploy electronic surveillance, which I consider to be a far more powerful term than spying, because electronic surveillance is such an investigative invasive technique. It's an order by the court to basically monitor that person 24/7, not just tap their phones, but to plant microphones, cameras, whatever it takes to capture their conversations. So it seems to be a little bit of a silly distraction as to whether or not the term spy is used or not. Let's look at the real issue. The real issue is a U.S. citizen had a FISA court order issued against them, and did the FBI have sufficient information to do so? Now, they got the court order, so that would, on the surface of it, say there was sufficient information. But looking at the affidavit, it looks like the court may not have had all the information that they should have had in order to, while considering that order.
The CNN town hall you mentioned that Comey had last week, he was asked about the forthcoming DOJ Inspector General report, Michael Horowitz report, and some reporting predicting that it may not cast Comey in a particularly flattering light. He said, let's see it, basically like bring it on. What do you expect from that IG report, and particularly as it pertains to not just Comey, but that entire senior leadership strata in the FBI under Comey?
Right. Well, all of us on the outside, no longer in the FBI, depend on what we hear in congressional testimony, what we've heard in the press reporting, which can be, wild. But I think what the IG rightfully is looking at were there any of the procedures or policies violated in collecting and aggregating information that led to that electronic surveillance? And that means going back to the beginning and seeing, was there sufficient basis for the FBI to launch an investigation in the first place, let alone get a warrant to electronically surveil somebody? And there are very strict guidelines called Attorney General guidelines that the FBI must follow when they initiate a case, and that those guidelines articulate thresholds of information that are required in order to start a case. So, and by Comey's own admission, right when he was fired by the president, he said, "I still don't know whether we had, whether there's anything to this Russia investigation that we started." So, if you're that uncertain about it at that point, how certain could you have been in the beginning? And and the initial information that they seem to be depending on were some reports about some comments that George Papadopoulos, a kind of a third stringer on the campaign, made about having dirt on Hillary Clinton. It doesn't look like, or it gives rise to legitimate questions as to whether there was sufficiency in the initiation of the investigation and in obtaining a warrant for electronic surveillance.
You were special agent for 24 years. I assume you had some interactions with both Comey and Mueller during that time?
Well, Mueller was director when I was an assistant director, and Comey was appointed by President Obama after I had left the FBI. But I know Director Mueller quite well.
What's your handle on Mueller? Give us your opinion.
I think similar to what you've heard a lot of people say, he is an American hero. He legitimately so, a public servant. I never heard one word come out of his mouth that was political or would give rise to concerns about that type of thing, unlike we've heard from his successor, James Comey. And I think that, it doesn't mean that as director he didn't make decisions that any one of us in the executive level of the FBI didn't question at times or disagree with. Many decisions we did and supported, like any director. But there's not a political nature in any decision that he made.
Is that the real break between somebody like Mueller and Comey, and what really rankles a lot of rank and file FBI guys and gals? Is it that Comey's more of a politician than he is a law enforcement officer?
I think and that goes for career agents who are now retired and those who are still in. I get a lot of back channel feedback. Obviously, I've made some public comments, and I'm not a professional commentator, but a large swath of FBI agents, retired and current, are unsettled by an FBI director being so directly political. This is unprecedented. We haven't seen that in the FBI's history. And the reason that it unsettles so many is because the FBI, the vitalness of the FBI depends on its impartiality, its objectivity, its ability to enforce the law regardless of political influences. And so when you have a director that's telegraphing so directly his animosity towards a presidential candidate or now president, it's not something that sits well.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's got a book out. He was on CNN Town Hall. When you watch him and
I think he's going to be the center square on Hollywood Squares before too long. Yeah.
I mean, do you think that obviously he's hurt the reputation of the FBI, but how do they get the reputation back?
Well, I think the current director is taking some right steps. I haven't, I've been told by those inside the FBI now that he has taken steps to initiate policy to make sure that what we saw during both the Clinton email investigation and the Trump-Russia counterintelligence investigation, which were run out of the director's office, James Comey's office, by a tight-knit group of individuals associated with Comey and his deputy director, Andrew McCabe, running an investigation out of the director's office of the FBI is unheard of. So, and I think part of the damage that has been done. So the new director, Christopher Wray, is establishing policy to make sure that never happens again. Investigations are done in the field. They're done by experienced investigators out away from headquarters, where FBI intersects most closely with the political flame of D.C. You don't want investigations happening at headquarters. You want them out with experienced investigators, and that'll be ensured as we go forward, and I think that's good news.
As part of this look back to 16 that Barr and Wray are doing, there's one crime we know was committed: unmasking of General Flynn. Do you expect that that the person who illegally unmasked General Flynn will be identified and that issue will be addressed in some material way?
Let's fervently hope so, because that's part and parcel to the sanctity and importance of the FISA court. Anytime this U.S. government intercepts someone who's called a U.S. person, in other words, a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident of the United States, anytime as a result of that interception, a U.S. person's name comes out, it is protected, because this is an intelligence investigation. It's not a criminal investigation. It's not going to go to court. Reputations aren't going to be damaged. So those names are protected deliberately. When they're frivolously unmasked, it places the whole process and the integrity of the process and the value of our intelligence gathering apparatus at peril. So if it's done, as I say, frivolously, then that has to be held to account, and hopefully whoever did that or whoever ordered it, both are held to account on that.
You're also in your career the principal deputy director for the National Counterterrorism Center. So I wanted to get your take on this latest discovery of a jihadist compound on American soil. This in Macon County, Alabama. The same individual who was behind the compound in New Mexico, Siraj Wahhaj, who's under indictment right now on terrorism charges and so forth, allegedly responsible for this compound in Alabama. What does it say to where we are with respect to interdicting Islamic terrorism? We've seen some instances recently that suggest that it's not over. We may have permanently crippled ISIS in North Africa and the Middle East, but that doesn't mean that America is not still threatened by terrorist activity, Islamic terrorist activity in particular. Having two compounds, one in Alabama and one in New Mexico, sort of chilling, and it seems like it's underreported and the importance underappreciated.
It's funny you should mention that. I worked terrorism mostly through my career, and the one constant seemed to be, in the worst cases, was a compound somewhere in the mix, whether it was on the white supremacist anti-government side or on the jihadi side or other ideologies that reared their heads using terrorism. That we just kept running into compounds. Compounds are never a good thing. But to your larger point, the ideology driving the jihadi movement is not going to go away soon. It is because of the phenomenon of the internet and the ability to spread messages and communicate securely. Ideologies will live on. So the steps that we're taking overseas, direct confrontation, are important. In my experience, fighting terrorism, the only way to vanquish it is to overwhelm it, is to delegitimize it, and you do that by investigating and in our country, throwing everybody you can into jail who's violating the law along these lines. Overseas, those who have taken up arms, you confront them and you eradicate them. So that is the solution, and so the FBI is busy constantly investigating these individuals, and people aren't investigated for their ideology. They're investigated for their call to arms, for their indications of willingness to use violence and the use of that violence. That's the tripwire that gets them investigated. And so the Bureau is going to find these individuals popping up constantly, and it'll be a while before this ever gets solved.
He is a former assistant director of intelligence for the FBI, was a special agent for 24 years, principal deputy director of the National Counterterrorism Center, and the founder and principal of New Street Global Solutions, a consulting company. His column, you want to check out, thehill.com, is James Comey is in trouble, and he knows it. Kevin Brock, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's like a hot, steaming cup of information to start your day. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560.